Hello, everybody. I hope you guys are blessed and your day is going well so far. So, on today's video, we are going to speak about Christianity, Islam, and African spirituality, and we are going to discover which one is the oldest. So, this video will tell us the truth behind all of them. And after this video, I think most of us we would have learned the truth behind all of them. And basically, when you are there worshiping, you know exactly who you are worshiping, you know exactly how you were supposed to worship, and this spirituality that you've attached yourself to, and your ancestors and your forefathers, who have they been worshiping and who have they attached you to, who have they sacrificed you to, who have they covenanted you to. So guys, before we go into our topic today, do not forget to subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, like and share, because I believe that this information will help a lot of other people out there, not just you. And if you feel that this information helped you, or if you feel that no, there's something that you would like to add, or you're not sure about something, do not forget to comment. Leave your comment. Let's interact with each other. So now let's get to it. So we all know that the Bible took place in the 1st century. Right now we're in the 20th century. So I'm also going to paint a picture as I discuss this with you guys. So we all know that the Bible took place in the 1st century, right at the beginning. So we all know that whatever happened with Jesus, it was in the 1st century. The flood took place in the 1st century. The story of Moses, we are full aware that all of this happened in the 1st century, right at the beginning. So everything that we are currently being taught today happened centuries and centuries ago, and we are in the 20th century. So you can imagine how long ago is this. So there's scientific evidence, obviously, to date that proves also that all these activities of the Bible did take place. And then we know that Prophet Muhammad was born in the 5th century, between the 4th and the 5th century. And then we know that he was active in the 7th century. So we know that during that time, the 5th and the 7th century, then that was when he was active. So we're full aware that 500 years later, almost 500 years later, after the stories in the Bible took place, then we know that, okay, this young prophet, I can imagine when he was very young, he's being told about all these things that happened 500 years ago. He's also being told about this Jesus 500 years ago, before he was born. He's hearing all of these things. So which means I can also imagine that during that time, hence the Quran also speaks about the things that happened in the Bible, because 500 years, it's not so long ago from the time all the activities, all the things that happen. It's not so long ago, because even today we also see buildings that are 500 years old. We also see trees that are 500 years old. So we know that if they can still stand, we know that it's not, there's evidence for us now if a building is 500 years old. So we know that, okay, there's evidence. And I'm guessing even for him during that time, there was also a little bit of evidence proving that, okay, this actually did happen, right? Enough evidence. So because it's still 500 years later, and then he writes, and then he becomes active in the 7th century, and then that's when he starts, I'm guessing he's older now, and then he starts his preachings, right? And then now let's speak about African spirituality. So many of you guys think that African spirituality, or now it's called African spirituality. So many of you guys think that African spirituality is the gods that I knew and all of this. It's something that is currently new and we are all hyping it up now because it's something that is new. African spirituality, the gods themselves, they're very old. We see these gods, the Bible speaks about these gods dating back to the 1st century. These gods, we see them in the 1st century. We see them during the time of Moses. We see them there. Enoch speaks about these gods. We know that these are very, very old gods. So we know they've been active since the 1st century. They're very, very old. So the gods that the goddess of the mountain, whatever they're called, the goddess of the rivers, the marine kingdom, these are very, very old gods. These are very old spirits. Let me put it that way because they refer to them as spirits, right? The marine spirit, when they go to the waters. For me, I think they've got different names, different times, different time zone, different areas. It's just the same gods. In China, they'll refer to them as something else. In India, they'll refer to them as something else, the gods there in India. But at the end of the day, it all builds down to the same gods. They're not different from those gods, the gods of Egypt, the ones that the Bible speaks about during the time of Moses. Those are not different gods. They are the exact same gods. And I also want to highlight, we see that even the time of Jesus, these gods are also very active. But we see, one thing that we see is that we can also confirm is that these gods we see during the time of Moses, we see that they are powerful gods. These spirits, we see that they're very powerful. They've got influence. They influence the entire Egypt. So we know that these are very, very powerful gods, right? But then I want to highlight something and point something out. So then in the 1st century, we know that Jesus died. And then after his death, then we see then Christianity becoming very, very, very popular. We see that this is within the 2nd century, it becomes popular in Africa and in other parts of the world. It becomes, in fact, the first Bible that was put together, compiled together, was in the 4th century. It was just scrolls, and then the first Bible was compiled in the 4th century. So we see this Christianity becoming very popular throughout all parts of the world, between the 2nd, 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th century, and even but when it gets to the 7th century, then we see something interesting, right? When the Prophet Muhammad rises up, then we see a decline again in Christianity, but we also see an increase again in what we now call African spirituality. We see now these gods from being silent for about 3 to 4 centuries. Now we see them being very active again in the 7th century. The same time that Islam is formed, we also see that these gods now gain their strength, they gain their power, and then now they become very, very active gods again to date. Hence, most Africans would obviously say that these are old gods. These are old gods. We've served these gods for centuries. Yes, we're not denying that these are very old gods. But I also want to point something when it comes to these gods, is that, let me make an example with an adult and a child. When you're an adult and you want to manipulate your child into doing something, or any child really into doing something, or you want to tell a child, come with me and whatever, even if you have very bad intentions for this child, it becomes very easy, because you must remember that you are older, you are a lot more wiser. So these gods are very old gods. So which means they dating back to the 1st century. They just went all silent when Jesus ascended and Christianity was formed. But in the 7th century, we see that they came back with full force. They were not gone, they were just not active. And we see them with full force now. They're ready. And during the time of Islam, and we see African spirituality rising again. So we know that these are old spirits. So which means we know that they're wiser. We're full aware of the fact that they are much more wiser. They're much more older. So which means they can influence anybody into doing anything. It's not just the devil. They work together with the devil. I'm not going to sit here and lie about it. But they're wiser spirits, right? They're older spirits. They're wiser spirits. The same example that I made. But then now look at with a child, right? With a child, like a small child, if you groom your child into whatever, and this is how discipline your child into, this is how we do things at home. When they go outside and somebody tries to instill something different than what you've taught them at home, it becomes very difficult, because at home I was taught 1, 2, and 3. So I'm not prepared to learn anything else outside from what I've been taught at home, right? So that is obviously the difference. So which means a child, if you're saying to a child, come with me now, and the parent had said, like, no, you don't go anywhere with strangers, obviously the child would be like, no, I'm not going to go anywhere with you, because my mom and dad, they said 1 and 2 and 3. So even with Christianity, once you've learned the word of God, it makes it very, very easy for you to say that I cannot come with you, Satan, or I cannot worship these gods, I cannot worship these spirits, simply because this is what the Lord has taught me, right? So we're not disputing. Remember, we've never disputed that these gods, we've never disputed that these gods are old gods. The youngest of them all, really, it's actually Islam. Then African spirituality is old. Christianity is very, very old. So during this time, then we see slowly Christianity disappearing from Africa. So when we see Christianity disappearing from the continent and going to other parts of the world, right? Remember, it was active. I want you guys to take note of what I said. Christianity was active, right, in the 4th century, through between the 2nd, 3rd, and the 4th century to the 1st century, in the continent, throughout the entire world. So which means everywhere Christianity was very active. But then in the 7th century, then these gods come back, Islam is there, and then also somehow it managed to open a doorway for these gods to come back, right? So now these gods are now active in the continent, and with them being active with the continent, remember what the Lord had said, that anything else outside of him comes with a lot of curses. So then the continent, we see the continent eventually, in the long run, we see people coming in, we call them the white men, coming in and dividing the continent and taking over the continent. But you must remember that you can't live physically, we're here, but remember, I want to also point this out, that their forefathers, their ancestors, had already built a spiritual foundation for them. So which means these people knew God. These people never left God the same way that we did. in Africa. They never left God. God stayed with them. Yes, a man's heart can eventually be very evil. God is a God that keeps his promises. Look at the Jews of today, the Jewish people of today. He's a God that keeps his promises. We're not going to deny that, right? So then in the 14th century, then when the white man comes into the continent, they bring back the Bible. Remember, in the fourth century, the Bible was already active in the continent. Actually, the first copy of the Bible was found in Mount Sinai, which is here in Africa, in the fourth century, not like how people tell us that it was in the 14th century. No, in the 4th century. Then in the 14th century, then the Bible comes back to the continent. Now we see the very same uprise of then they're starting to re-educate us. The missionaries, they start re-educating us about Christianity, about who Jesus Christ was, because there's absolutely no way that all white people could have been evil people. That's not possible. And they came to the continent. Prior to that, you must remember that they were still taking in slaves outside of the continent, right? And those slaves were taught about God. Hence, in the continent, we still had African spirituality, and God was not so popular, but African people that were outside of the continent speaks God. They speak Jesus because that's who they know, that's who they were taught when they got there, to America, to the UK. When they got to these countries, they got to learn about who Jesus Christ is, and some of them, they've seen the power of Jesus Christ. So now let's speak about now that we've laid down a foundation, right, for you guys, so that you have a very, very clear understanding which one is old, who is who, and who are these gods, and how old is Christianity, when did it leave Africa, and when did it come back to Africa. So now that you have that foundation, and with Islam, how old it is, so now that you have that foundation, now let's speak about the altars and the covenants. Now, back then in the 7th century, we have our ancestors, right? When we have our ancestors now are going into covenants. These are very old covenants. Our ancestors now are getting into covenants with these gods. They're going to rivers, they're going to mountains, they're going to caves, and they're dedicating generations and generations to these gods. And these gods are receiving altars after altars to these gods, and these gods are receiving, right? They are receiving all these gifts, are receiving us, because I will call us gifts. And now God moves away from you, your generations, the generations, because remember, you are dedicated somewhere else. You are dedicated to, particularly, let me say that people in the KZN, closer to the oceans. So you are dedicated to the gods here of the marine kingdom, in the oceans and everything. I also want to point out, you want to look at how powerful and how influential. It's almost as if his strength was very abnormal. the king of the Zulu people, Shaka. So whatever spirits that he would have invited in himself, whatever spirits that he would have invited in himself came with a lot of aggression, right? When we look at his history, whatever spirits he invited in they also came with a lot of aggression. So now generations after him, they're going to inherit the same spirits. Because remember, you were dedicated. And then it's us there. Then it's the Sotho people. Again, in the mountains and everything, we were dedicated to these gods. Years and years and years. Even before you were born, you were already in a covenant. You were already dedicated, because it was generations that would come after. So you can imagine somebody, maybe your ancestor wanted success, wanted more livestock, wanted the crops to grow properly, like they wanted something from these gods. They give, but you're going to suffer. For every child born in that family, in that bloodline, certain things must be performed. If they don't perform, the child gets sick. Now, these are not stupid gods, guys. The child would literally get sick. These are very old spirits. So if it was said that this must happen, then you are going to see a trend that, okay, if we don't do something like this happens in my bloodline. If you marry, if you don't, like for example with us, I don't know if they do it with other cultures, with other tribes, but with the Sotho people here in South Africa, what happens is that if you are going to get married, then you have to slaughter a cow. Half must stay in the woman's family and half must go to the man's family, and there's some rituals that need to be done, bringing those ancestors together. So technically bringing those spirits together, so that the spirits that, maybe let's say I married somebody that has spirits that are behind him are from the Marine Kingdom and mine are from the mountains. Those spirits now must be recognized by the Marine Kingdom spirits, and he must also be recognized by the mountain spirits. So those spirits know that, okay, you were covenanted to us. Now, if you do not do that, if you don't do that, you get married and you do not do that, all hell will break loose. Because they want, your ancestors made a promise. So these spirits, they want you to come to the altar. They want you to spill that blood of that animal. They want you to dedicate your wife. They want you to dedicate your husband to these spirits, to them, because your ancestors, they made a promise on your behalf. So under no circumstances should anybody undermine the power that comes with the spirits behind African spirituality. Those are very old spirits. I've told you, they come back. They are old. As far as the 1st century, that's how old they are. These are very old spirits. So you can imagine how, you know how you go and you take a loan from the bank or wherever, and then you're so excited, you sign. So you can imagine your ancestors, that's what they did. They signed, and they got into agreements. And after getting into agreements with these spirits, without looking into the far future, that, you know, there's so many generations that are going to come from me. And even though it will not affect me now, I will get what I want now. But after me, a lot of them are going to suffer. Even if they tell you about Izigubu or whatever, I don't know. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Izigubu, whereby it's called this ritual that you do. They give it to you, some ritual that you do, and then you become all of a sudden an overnight billionaire, or I don't know how it works. but some rituals that you do, and then your business becomes successful and everything. Now, of course, you're getting what you want, but generations after you, there's far more consequences. They will suffer because of what you did now. 40 years from now, your kids, your children, they will be suffering because the Sangomas, the Gobelas are not telling you guys this. They're not telling you guys this. In the 7th century, in the 10th century, when you were being covenanted, you were not there. But the devil does not forget. The spirits will not forget that you belong to me. So now, when you break down those altars, because now you must remember that you were dedicated, right? And once you try to step away from what they even warn you that your life will become miserable. They're not lying. When they say that when you don't slaughter that cow when your father dies or your mother dies, when you don't shave off your hair when your father dies or your mother dies, and you bath with the blood or whatever you bath with of that animal, when you do not do that, you are going to have problems. They're not lying. They're not lying to you. They're telling you the truth, because you must remember that the covenant still stands. So now you can leave all of these and move away to Christianity, right? And say that, hey, I've accepted the Lord and Savior. But did you break the covenant? Did you? No, you didn't. It's like saying that, like, you know what? I have my 200,000 that I've borrowed from the bank, and I bought and I've signed the contract. Even if you don't have, and I've signed the contract, and then now I've lost my job and I can't pay anymore. No, the contract still stands. You're still owing the bank. The contract will always stand. You are still owing the bank money. So yes, fine, you are no longer working. You can't afford to pay anymore, but the contract still stands. You're still owing the bank money. So even if you decide that I'm moving away from this and I'm accepting Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, that contract does not go away unless you enter into a new covenant. That covenant that your ancestors made on your behalf, it still stands. Unless you decide that I'm going to get into a new covenant with the Lord. Holy Spirit, intercede. I've seen in my family that we don't reach the age of 30. So now we are going to pray against this. I've seen that everybody in my family dies from cancer. We are going to pray. You are going to break that covenant. You are going to tell that spirit, you are no longer going to torment me anymore. You were also created. There is Jesus Christ, who's far much more older than you. In the Bible, when God says, he says, let us. So which means we know that Jesus Christ was already present. And it also says that, what is this word that I'm looking for? I'm looking for a particular word. It also says that, Jesus was sent. So which means he was already existing. Jesus was also sent. God sent his only son for us. So which means he was sent. He was already present. He was just sent here on earth so that he can die. You remind them that, hey, I'm not going to slaughter anything for you because Jesus was slaughtered for me. So I'm in covenant, the new covenant. I'm in the new covenant with I think it's in Mark 14 where Jesus breaks the bread, and then the Last Supper. I think so. And Jesus enters us into a new covenant, his blood. When his blood spilled, we entered into a new covenant. You remind them that even you here, Without God, there's nothing. Remember, spirits don't die. Without God, you wouldn't have existed. So now I'm entering into a new covenant, and you need to step away. You need to leave me alone. I will not get sick. My children will not get sick. I will not suffer financially because of what you were promised, because I'm refusing to do what you're asking me to do. I will not dedicate my wife to whatever spirits my ancestors dedicated their wives to. I will not dedicate my husband. I will not do everything. You need to study the bloodline, the family line, family tree, and see what you need to pray against. Denounce everything. Pray against the certain things that your family dedicated you against once you are now a full born again Christian. The Gobelas, they know what I'm talking about. They must not lie to you. They know what I'm talking about. Now, we can't leave Islam. We can't leave Islam. The reason why Muhammad could not, just like how these days we are denying Jesus Christ, some of you guys are denying Jesus Christ and saying that there was no such man. The reason why Muhammad could not deny Jesus Christ, it's because probably whatever happened during that time was still. That's why I made an example with a building that is 500 years old, so which means it would still stand. So whatever happened during that time or in the first century, there was still visible evidence that he could not exactly say that, like, no, that is not true. There was no such man as Jesus Christ. The only thing that he could say about Jesus Christ, because I get it, isn't it, he also had stories about him. The only thing that he could say about Jesus Christ was that he was just a prophet, just like him. That's the only thing that he could say about him. But he can't exactly say that man did not exist, because there were probably people in that, for example, maybe their families knew Jesus Christ at that time. Maybe there were people at the time that would show him, this happened here, this happened here, this happened here. I can imagine when he's young and his family is showing him. I don't know what happened in the 7th century, between 6th and the 7th century, where now he's deciding that, like, no, I'm also a prophet, and also Jesus was also a prophet just like me. But now the difference between him and Jesus says, I know where I'm going. I'm going to prepare for you. He says, I don't know where I'm going. Because just like us, he was a man, but Jesus was not a man. Anyway, guys, I hope I've clarified some of the questions. I've clarified today. I think when you decide that I'm going to kneel down and I'm going to I'm going to summon my ancestors, I'm going to go to the temple, I'm going to go to church, I'm going to pray. I guess today the whole point of this video is to give you guys wisdom, so that when you are praying, you do it with intention, because you know who you are praising. When you are praying, you do it with intention, because you know that I'm calling on the spirits, I'm calling on the ancestors that I'm calling on the spirits that my ancestors dedicated me to. So when you are calling on them, you know exactly that, hey, I belong, I was dedicated to these ancestors. That's why they say that if you are not sure, there's something that is called ukufamba. I don't know what it's called in English, but you visit the spirit world when you famba, and then you get in touch with some of these spirits. They tell you that, hey, this was the initial covenant that I've had with your ancestors, just in case your family is no longer practicing. So this is where you would need to continue so that we can continue with the contract or with the covenant. So when you go back today, you would know that when I go back, I'm going back. I don't care what happens after this, but I'm going back, and I'm going back to who my ancestors used to worship. So which means when I go back to who my ancestors worship, to these gods, I'm going back to say that no, I mean, I don't want this Jesus that they are teaching me about. I want this one that we used to exchange in return of generations. I want those generations that are going to come after me. They will have to see their way out. I will dedicate them to you. Or you can dedicate your kids to Jesus. Or you can dedicate them to the God, Allah, the God of Muhammad. You can dedicate them to the spirits of the water, mountains, the sun, the moon, Venus. Or you can say, I am going to dedicate you to Jesus. I'm going to dedicate you to God. Anyway, guys, do not forget, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching the whole video. Do not forget to subscribe to my channel. Every Thursday there will be a brand new video for you guys. We discuss spiritual matters. I also share my own testimonies with you guys, my own life experience, and we discuss different topics about spiritual matters. See you guys next week, Thursday. Have a good day. Don't forget to follow. Don't forget to follow. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. This video will benefit a lot of people. People will be worshiping who they know they're worshiping, not because a Gobela, their grandmother, their aunt told them who to worship. After watching this video, people will know exactly who they are supposed to be worshiping and why they're worshiping who they're worshiping.